Let me welcome you to this valedictory session. We are very fortunate that in this session we have two eminent personalities. We have Lord Nicholas Stern, who has really played a major role in connecting the whole challenge of climate change with the mainstream of economic policy. And it goes back to the time when he did that great report when he was in the Treasury in England. But then he has kept that up and has been consistent in pursuing that agenda. But he is somebody who knows India well. He's been working in a village in UP for the past 50 years, roughly?
46.
46. 4 years is fine. It's as good as 50, you see. So he's been working and he's been following it steadily. And one of these days you must go and read his books on this, which traces the development of these villages. But there's much more that I could speak about. So I'm very happy that we have Nicholas Stern with us. We have Mr Jayant Sinha, who's a member of parliament, and he's somebody who came to politics after a long stint in the world of finance, and then also in the world of, if you like, the finance which is involved in supporting the social activities. He was quite active. He was one of the, we were perhaps the first head of the Media Foundation in India.
Yes, that's right.
He was the first head of the Media Foundation in India. And I know of it for the simple reason, one of the NGOs I'm involved in got a big grant from them. So that's always very helpful. And not TERI, another one. And so I'm very happy that he is here because he brings to the bear a very broad perspective onto this issue. So we start with...
Thank you very much, Mr. Desai. Well, thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here for this session. It's the valedictory session. I know you've had an excellent 3 days of discussions and consultations on a variety of issues related to sustainability. And what I thought I might do in my few minutes here before we have Professor Stern come up is to put it all together from the perspective of India's economic development. Now, the traditional view on development, and Professor Stern and other economists have had a very important role in shaping that thinking, has always been that development is about farm to factory. And if you look at the traditional economic thought around how countries have developed, whether it is the West during the time of the Industrial Revolution, or East Asia, which is Japan and Korea and China over the last few decades, the notion has always been for countries to move beyond low income status, get to middle income and high income status, you have to get people out of agriculture, that is from farms, into factories and urbanize at the same time. So these two vectors operating in parallel, which is industrialization and urbanization together, are going to end up in a developed country. That is farm to factory is the thinking. Now, as we have been thinking about India's development model, there has been discussion, people have used the term premature deindustrialization, so that India is moving not to a manufacturing-led or a factory-driven development model, but one which is a services-driven development model. And so in that sense, is it an outlier and will it achieve development that is reach middle and high income status, or is it a form of development that is going to result in an outcome that will not lead to high income for India? So this whole discussion of India as an anomaly, as a paradox in the development economics literature has been ongoing for some time. But I have been advocating this for a long time, believe that India's unique requirements will result in a unique development model. And that development model is not a farm to factory development model. What I call it as being is a farm to frontier development model. And more recently, because of all of the issues around sustainability, and of course we were very fortunate to have these young people come up and once again tell us what our priorities should be quite clearly. They of course talk about sustainable development, and so I think India's development model cannot be farm to factory. It must be farm to frontier in terms of productivity, in terms of technology, but it has to be a green, sustainable frontier. And that's what I want to talk to you all about. Because the reality is that if you ask people, for example, in Hazaribagh, and these are my voters, if you ask Bhola Mehto what kind of job he wants, he'll tell you he doesn't want a job in the informal sector. He doesn't want a low-paying job in some factory somewhere or on a construction site somewhere. If he's thinking about it from people in the north will say they want a job in government, people in the south will say they want an IT white-collar job. But they want a job in the formal sector. They want a job which will enable them to go from farming, which has output of $1,600 per year, which is in that sense a low output job, to not a job which is $2,000 per year, which is in, let's say, a textile factory, but jobs like in banking or in aviation, which will enable them to generate $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 worth of output every year. If they do that, if we can go from instead of the farm to factory type of a development, to farm to frontier, getting to the high productivity jobs, that's where somebody like a Bhola Mehto can make a lot more money than he's making right now. Because on the farm we know, ladies and gentlemen, we know in the farm that an average farming family is making 7,000 rupees per month. But if you ask that person in an average farming family in India's rural hinterland whether they're willing to leave their village and go work in a textile factory in Surat or outside of Bangalore for 15,000 rupees a month, they'll tell you they don't want to go. It's not enough of a leapfrog in terms of their living standards for them to leave their farm, where now, because of all of the development that's happened, they can earn 7,000 rupees a month and lead a reasonable life, to going to a factory somewhere and leading a life that they feel is very cut off from their social fabric. So if we really want that leapfrog, we need to get people from the farm, 7,000 rupees a month, to the productivity frontier, the best possible jobs, the most productive jobs, the most technology advanced jobs, and we have to get them to the frontier. That is the technology and productivity frontier. The best jobs that we can possibly get them, a job in IT services or in some other output industry. Now, remember that GDP per capita measures what people produce. And only if they produce a lot, only if their productivity is high, are they going to be able to earn a sufficient amount of money. So we really need to focus in terms of our own development on productivity, getting people into high quality jobs. Now, to be able to produce more, how do we take somebody like Bhola Mehto and put them in a position where they can actually produce more? Because again, if they don't produce more, they can't earn more. And to produce more, either we improve their skills and make them a software engineer who can do software development for Google. Difficult for Bhola Mehto to make that happen. Or alternatively, we plug them into a world-class supply chain and equip them with the most advanced tools and technologies so that they can actually produce more. Great example of this is a ride-sharing company like Uber, where the same driver who was making 5 or 10 or 15,000 rupees a month can double, triple, quadruple their earnings because they're plugged into a world-class supply chain. And that's what I mean by technology, tools, facility, supply chain. So if we can move them on the horizontal axis, then we can actually get them to the productivity frontier. But we know from all of the challenges that we are facing globally and in India, around carbon emissions, around pollution, that this frontier is not simply about competitiveness. It's not simply about output. It is also about sustainability. And that's why I'm calling it the green frontier. Yes, we have to be at the competitiveness frontier, but that frontier has to also be sustainable for us to have a world to live in. That, in fact, is not a constraint on us. Getting to the green frontier actually opens up tremendous opportunities, and we need to think of it from a business and an investment point of view as opening up a host of opportunities. We already have a whole variety of companies that are operating at the green frontier. So our job now is to be able to create more and more of these companies. As these kinds of high productivity, high sustainability companies get created, we will create more and more of these high productivity jobs. And for every high productivity job, like we have in IT services, we create 3 indirect jobs. So if we can take people from the frontier and equip them with the tools and the technologies they need to produce more, we will at the same time create a variety of indirect jobs. And so if we do that, if our direct frontier jobs go from about 10 million, which is where they are right now, to about 50 million over the next 20 years, we will also at the same time create a whole host of indirect jobs. And as a result of that, we will in total create about 200 million jobs if we follow this green frontier strategy. Now, this data on direct versus indirect jobs is derived from the indirect jobs that have been created in the IT services industry. In the IT services industry, which is very much at the technology frontier right now, for every single job that is created working for TCS or Wipro, we create 3 additional jobs in all kinds of ancillary industries that are linked to IT services. So if we really pursue this strategy of going for the most productive jobs, the jobs where people produce a lot of output, we will create a whole host of other jobs as well. Now, how do we do this? I'm not going to spend much time on this, happy to take questions, but really we have to unleash market forces. If we unleash market forces, we are going to create a lot of these jobs. We've already seen that in IT services, we're seeing it currently in fintech, we're seeing it in electric mobility right now. If we unleash market forces, these jobs do get created, and that results in sustained prosperity. And that's what I mean by farm to green frontier. If we can take Bhola Mehto, and we can plug him into a high value add dairy supply chain, either as a dairy farmer with instead of 1 cow, he has 5 to 8 cows, or into a world-class food processing dairy plant, that's when his productivity and his output will go up because he's plugged into a world-class supply chain. Similarly, it's not just about Bhola Mehto. It is also about Geeta Oraon. Can we get Geeta Oraon, a lady in Jharkhand, working in a really, really high-tech supply chain for textile, customized textile apparel? She can also produce a lot more, whether it's with a sewing robot and the latest textile factories. She can also produce a lot more, and therefore we can also get her onto the green frontier. And the reality, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm sure you spent a lot of time discussing it in the last 3 days, is that if you look at these green frontier industries, there are a whole host of them, whether it is clean air and water, clean coal, drones, energy efficiency, food processing and packaging. There's a whole host of industries that will enable people to generate more output, be more productive, as well as reduce carbon emissions and make the world a better place. And that's really what I think of. And I'm going to conclude with this slide. That's what I think of as driving and shaping our economic narrative over the next 20 or 30 years. If we want economic growth, if we want to get to not just 5 trillion, which we will of course achieve very soon, but if we really want to think about a $10 trillion economy, which by the way, at $10 trillion, we are at a GDP per capita at that point of about $7,000, which is a high middle income country. To be a $10 trillion GDP, 7,000 GDP per capita, the driver is let's get to the green frontier, let's push entrepreneurship. If we push entrepreneurship in these green industries, we are going to generate employment, as I have said, and at the same time, we'll do great things for the environment. It's a win-win-win for us in terms of jobs, in terms of growth, in terms of the environment, if we can unlock and unleash market forces towards green entrepreneurship, towards these green frontier types of jobs. And that's what I mean by getting to the green frontier. That's the direction ahead we should pursue. And just like what drove the Indian economy over the last 2 or 3 decades were the forces of globalization and liberalization. Globalization and liberalization were the forces that drove the Indian economy over the last 2 or 3 decades. I think the forces of competitiveness, productivity on the one hand, and sustainability on the other hand, can drive the Indian economy and must drive the Indian economy over the next 2 or 3 decades. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Sinha. Thank you very much, Mr. Sinha. I wish you had stayed on in the finance ministry. We would have gotten this in the budget tomorrow. But it's a very positive vision, and a vision which ties in with the whole challenge of sustainability that we have been talking about. Let me now turn to Nicholas Stern.
Thank you very much, Nitin. It's a pleasure to be here and to share a platform again. I have indeed shared a platform before with Jayant Sinha, and last time I learned from him, and this time also I learned from him. The spirit of what I'm going to say is very much in the spirit of his talk. I'll say it in my own way, but I think they fit very nicely together. And thank you, Ajay and Nitin, as the heads of TERI, for this very special occasion, and it's a pleasure to be back here at the Sustainable Development Summit. Now, we're talking about the future of sustainability. In order to underline what I'm saying, let me look back just for a moment. If you look back to the way in which sustainability and the environment were discussed in relation to growth in 30 or 40 years ago, if you look back to the UNFCCC's founding statement, it actually embodies a trade-off between environment and output. What are you ready to pay in terms of output for a better environment? And that's the way it was seen. That's back in 92. And it reflected the way in which I think economics and environment thought about each other as in terms of trade-offs of that sense. A little later, I mean maybe 10, 15 years ago, people talked about decoupling growth and environment, or reconciling, or if you're smart, you can put them together. I want to go beyond that. The story of what I'm saying is that the drive to the zero carbon sustainable economy is the growth story. It's not that you can put these two these two things in tension together in a way which sort of moderates the tension. It's much more positive than that. The drive to the zero carbon economy is the growth story, and it's a much better, more attractive growth story, including cities where you can move and breathe and be productive, and ecosystems which are robust and fruitful. Good ideas, even if you've never heard of climate change. So that's the story that I want to tell. And of course, it's a story that embodies sustainability, embodies the Sustainable Development Goals. So let me first elaborate just a bit on that growth story. I haven't got very long, so this will have to be headlines and bullet points only. Say something about urgency and opportunity, and then finish with the policies and the finance that could get us there. So let's think about the growth story first. We live in a world that's demand constrained. Global interest rates on the floor. So from the global point of view, we live in a demand constrained world. If we can bump up infrastructure investment, and we will need to bump up infrastructure investment as a world by a couple of percentage points of GDP, we will increase demand in the world economy at a time when it's demand constrained. And what we must do is do that in a way which invests in the future. This isn't a Keynesian digging holes in the road. This is investment which is well directed to underpin the growth story of the 21st century. So we'll increase demand and we'll sharpen supply, because that infrastructure will be more efficient, cleaner, and so on. We also, in the moving to the short to medium term, we unleash a Schumpeterian growth story of discovery, innovation, investment, and growth. We're working out much more attractive ways of doing things, and of course, we replace the old ways of doing things. So that is a very attractive growth story, and we remind ourselves there is no high carbon long run or medium run growth story. It self-destructs on the hostile environment it creates. So we're talking about the sustainable growth story of the 21st century. The definite article is critical there. But that story, with all its attractions, I don't want to pretend it's easy. It involves very fast change. This is an urgent story. One way, Jayant already described it. Let me describe it in another way. The world economy doubles in 20 years. The world's infrastructure doubles in less time than that. And at the same time, in those 20 years, we have to reduce emissions absolutely by at least 40% just for 2 degrees, much more for well below 2 degrees, and much, much more for 1.5 degrees. But just take 2 degrees. If you have to reduce emissions by absolutely 40% and output doubles, you're reducing emissions per unit of output by 80% in 2 decades. And the infrastructure in those 2 decades is decided really in the next few decades, given the lags that it takes in infrastructure investment to come to fruition. This is really urgent. These are decisions that we have to take now, and they do involve some dislocation, and we have to manage that dislocation well. So it is a win-win-win, as Jayant described very convincingly, but it does involve radical change, it does involve strong policy, and we shouldn't pretend that it's easy. But the opportunity there is tremendous. I mean, if you excuse me for going back in dates to the time we published the Stern Review in 2006, that was 1 year before the iPhone. Imagine now what you can do in the management of energy, transport, cities, and land. You can do so much more than you could just a dozen or so years ago. We didn't think then in 2006 that a dozen years or so after that, that all the major car companies in the world would be talking about the end of the internal combustion engine. And we'd better end that, because that's not consistent with net zero emissions. Who would have thought that the cost of solar would plunge in that time by a factor of at least 10? And similarly wind, and similarly storage, moving very fast in that direction. It's quite extraordinary what we've seen in terms of technology. We can also see what's possible in those sectors that we were thinking of as being hard to decarbonize. We can see the future of sea transport in hydrogen or ammonia. We can see the future of home heating in terms of air source heat pumps or hydrogen. Now, we're going to discover what the best ways are of doing things, but I think if you look back over 10 or 12 years, when we go for it, we really see that we do find those solutions and we drive the cost down. Think of the LED light bulb in India. The price of LED light bulbs were driven down by scale, and India gave it that scale. China gave the scale in driving down solar. The emerging market countries are going to be in the frontier. They're going to be leading on all this. We're already seeing it, and we're going to see much more. So technologically, so much has changed in the last dozen years or so. So the question has become not can we do it, but yes we can. How are we going to put the policies together to make that happen? Well, a price of carbon is a very important part of that story, but that's not the whole story. There'll be regulation and standards and city design. Look what happens, the LED light bulb started to make great progress when in Europe we banned the incandescent light bulb. We banned the incandescent light bulb at a time when we could see possibilities, but we didn't quite know what they would turn out to be. It turned out to be LED, and then India drove the price down of LED. Those are the kinds of things that we're going to have to think of. Carbon price, fundamentally important. Get rid of fossil fuel subsidies, fundamentally important. But think of those regulation and standards coming along as well. They'll be a very important part of the story. And it's very important that public policy is predictable. That doesn't mean it's inflexible or rigid, but it's predictable. We've made some big mistakes in Europe in saying, here's a subsidy for solar. We suddenly find out that the subsidy's been successful, and we take it away, bang, without any prior notice. We should say that here are the encouragements we're going to give, and as they move to success, we're going to phase them out, and we explain how we do it. So not only sound policies, but in terms of proper pricing, but also predictably flexible policies so that we can see what's happening. So all these wonderful investment opportunities, good policies and sound institutions can pull them through into real investment programs. But those investment programs have to be financed. You've got to get the right kind of finance in the right place at the right time on the right scale. That's why we need pioneering people in finance ministries like Jayant to set those in place. And it means public finance. Some part of this will be public sector. If the public sector borrows to do it, that borrowing has to be done in the right way and in a way that really brings down the cost of capital. It has to be, we can think of development banks, multilateral or national, that help take risk which the private sector can't immediately take. That means that they crowd in the private sector and you get multipliers on what they do. We have to think imaginatively about that finance, and we have to recognize that some part of it's going to be on the public budget, some part of it, and that can be either tax revenue or borrowing, has to be done wisely. Some part of it's going to be private sector, but in that story it can be much bigger if we manage risk well, and managing risk well can be very greatly facilitated by development banks, whether they're local development finance institutions or international financial institutions. So we can see where we need to go. We can see it's attractive. We can see it involves strong action. We can see that it's very urgent, that it's going to be radical, and it's not going to be easy, but it really is possible. And if we surely look at where we are now, world interest rates on the floor, rapid technological change, international agreements, which actually have been quite robust relative to the pressures and pushbacks that have been put on them. And we have the wonderful pressure from the young people here who we salute, congratulate, and thank for their inspiration. So thank you very much indeed. Yes, we can.
Thank you, Nick. I think we had it is very nice to have a valedictory session where we have two positive speeches which tell us that the answers are there. Yes, we can, as Nick ended saying. The green frontier that Jayant Sinha was talking about. And throughout the session, we've had many examples of people talking about technologies or what is happening. The fact that the many entities like corporations, subnational entities are moving faster than national governments suggests that perhaps there is a possibility that the dynamics of growth that we will see will deliver results which the negotiating process of governments has not delivered so far. And that's a very positive measure. I suppose the real problem is taking those first steps. Taking those first steps to get rid of at least some counter policies like fossil fuel subsidies or things like that. So let us hope that the message from this session that we've had over the 3 days is take those first steps, because if you don't take those first steps, you'll end up in a dead end. That the real future lies in the green frontier that Jayant Sinha spoke of, in the way of bringing together the technology, the changing sphere of finance, etc., which Nick talked of. And I think in some ways we have the answer for the challenge which the young people posed us. So this is a very positive valedictory session that we've had. And with that, let me turn to Ajay Mathur, winding up. And then Annapurna. Thanks.
Mr. Desai, Mr. Sinha, Lord Stern, friends. WSDS 2020 comes to an end. And as with all good things, it comes to an end too soon. Too many of these sessions ended while we were still wanting them to go on and tell us more. But possibly, that is what makes sessions successful. We built this Sustainable Development Summit on the backs of national level regional dialogues in Delhi and Kolkata. We built them on the backs of international dialogues in Monaco and in New York. And during these 3 days, we have had 20 thematic tracks and 15 plenaries and keynote addresses. What they've done is distill the kinds of experiences that we've been having with the view of both informing us, but also to help create new partnerships. We are extremely delighted that we've been able to midwife a lot of new partnerships. Whether it is the Indo-Swiss Program on air pollution, whether it is the technology partnerships in the areas of waste management, all of these represent steps in moving ahead. We have been delighted that we have had people from all across the spectrum. We released about 15 reports at the summit, many produced by TERI, but many produced by other organizations as well. We were also delighted that we had speakers from a wide variety, from a wide canvas. You heard the children speaking today. You also heard the Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog speaking. You heard a number of ministers speaking. You heard the Chairman of the Finance Committee of Parliament speaking. All of this has happened because of the support that we have received from 21 partners who are listed here, and I want to thank each one of them for their contribution, which has helped in making this a substantive process. We are also very honored to have awarded the 15th Sustainable Development Leadership Award to Professor Jeffrey Sachs. As was said at that time, his continued interventions, his perseverance, his mainstreaming of the idea of sustainable development, and particularly the sustainable development goals into our consciousness, have helped move this agenda ahead. We have had 44 youth volunteers here. We have 5 young journalists. And these young journalists are drawn from Bennett University in the Youth Climate Conclave co-hosted with the European Union. I'm particularly delighted that we could, at this summit, also introduce you to an electric vehicle. I hope as the minister came this time to the summit in electric vehicle, next year, a lot of us would be able to raise our hands and say, so did I. We are also extremely delighted that this year we were able to completely overhaul and upgrade the kind of interaction that we have with the products that are coming out in the exhibition outside. It is a matter of great pride for us that with Messe München, we've been able to launch the IFAT Delhi. And hopefully this marks the beginning of a new frontier in the ability to quickly link here and now processes with here and now needs. It is with great pleasure that I welcome Bhupinder Singh, the head of IFAT, and would like him to come up and say a few words if you would like.
Thanks, Dr. Mathur. Distinguished dignitaries, eminent guests, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure and an honor to be associated with TERI. What started as a casual discussion a few months back over a coffee has transformed into an exhibition which has occupied the whole venue. We couldn't foresee that. But this underlines the appetite of such a platform in Delhi market. We could have over 45 companies displaying environmental technology solutions over solid waste management, wastewater management, air solutions, recycling, and over 1,000 visitors came to attend the trade show. So we are very happy to strengthen these conversations which are happening inside the hall. We are very happy to enlarge these conversations and take them towards certain solutions out on display. I think we share common values as IFAT India and same drive as TERI, which is a firm basis for us to grow our cooperation. And with that, I would like to thank Mr. Mathur, under whose leadership WSDS has grown, and I'm sure this edition is once again a resounding success. So with that, I also take the opportunity to invite all of you to IFAT Munich, which is world's largest environmental technology trade show with over 162 countries participating there. Thank you so much. I wish you all a nice evening, a great weekend. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you. As we end, I finally want to thank all my colleagues at TERI. As you can imagine, this has happened because of the hard work put in by people from across the organization. The team that did the Sustainable Development Summit and the program cell. Annapurna, can you get your colleagues here? The various people who organized the plenary sessions and the thematic sessions, the plenary and the thematic leads, the rapporteurs, the various facilitators who have made life, I hope, simpler and not more difficult for the many speakers who we had here. Our IT team, the TERI press, which brings out the updates and worked overtime to produce the documents that we released, the conference services team, to all of them, many, many thanks. You all realize that you have set for yourself a huge goal of doing a bigger, better, and more impactful summit next year.
That's it. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have all of you here. And I join everybody in thanking all of our colleagues from TERI who are responsible for the smooth manner in which this summit has been run. And there's Annapurna, who's the 20th summit, so I congratulate her particularly for the work that she has put in. That's her 20th summit.
I also want to note Mr. Sundar, who is here, for whom this is also the 20th summit. He's been to all of them.
That's it.